where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:10 p.m. in a Budapest that is as grim, as dark, as miserable, as wet and cold, as gray, as lifeless, as cheerless, as sunless as it has ever been. Has it ever been in my all the time that I've lived here? It's never been as dismal as this, day after day of rain, day after day of no sun. It's a permanent evening here in the city. Um, on that cheerful note, welcome everybody who has joined me. I really appreciate your company. Um, and so somebody, Peter, our friend Peter Kovic says, "Here, George, why are you not platformed in any Hungarian language media, or you just don't want to appear in it?" I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that question is. So I guess they don't they haven't asked me. So but that's there's no accounting for taste. But anyway, thank you for the question. So there's a couple of things we should discuss, and that's obviously the situation with the peace plans. So we spent last week exhaustively chronicling the developments of the peace plan. So we had the 28-point plan of Donald Trump, and then we had the reaction from the Europeans, who naturally were absolutely livid because they weren't expecting this. It caught them completely flat-footed. They thought that they basically had successfully sabotaged the Anchorage summit, and so and then once Trump announced the sanctions on the Russian oil majors, he said, "Oh, well, that's fantastic. We've got Trump on board. He's abandoned his hopes of negotiating something with Putin, and we can, go back to what we've always been doing, organizing our next round of sanctions. We already had 19, so the next round would be number 20. And, we can go around scaring our population with all sorts of tales of Russian terrorism, Russian spying, Russian subversion, Russian hybrid war, Russian disinformation. We could just go on doing that." And that was a very pleasant time. But, if you recall last week, we had Donald Tusk, the Polish prime minister, declaring, without any evidence, incidentally, that the Russians had sabotaged Poland's railway track, the blessed railway track that was delivering arms to Ukraine. I mean, this is absolute outrage that a railway track being used to deliver weapons to Ukraine should have been targeted by Russians. I mean, it's like this is a railway track, and like little children were using it. No, it's horrific, outrageous. And so we had a lot of bluster about that, and then there was a grand announcement that the guilty parties were these two Ukrainians who had scarpered to Belarus, and then they kind of arrested some people in Poland, all of whom were Ukrainians, but they were all, of course, working for Putin. And then, of course, they released some of the Ukrainians, but it's kind of bizarre, it's Putin, but the people who are they are being accused by the Poles are Ukrainians. So anyway, that was very nice. And then, then sometime in the middle of last week, we had the plans for the military Schengen. The military Schengen is this mechanism whereby all EU member states have to make their territories available at a moment's notice to the large deployment of tanks and armed forces and armored personnel carriers and weapons, and whatever needs to be transported will be transported, and no one will be permitted to put up any barriers to tanks crossing their territory. So that's the military Schengen, and the Europeans were very excited about this. And so what then happened was the announcement of the 28-point plan, and so that was we weren't expecting that, and of course, as we might have expected, the Europeans said, well, we got to do something to stop this, and of course that's what they tried to do. So we had you know a lachrymose announcement from Zelensky, addressing the nation, but of course addressing the Europeans. Hey, we're being forced to do something against our will. This is horrific. And then of course we had all of the bluster from the Europeans, even though they had to pretend for the sake of trying to keep in with Trump, that of course they were very, very, very positive about President Trump's very sincere efforts to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. But of course, they don't want this. That's the last thing that they want. But they have to pretend that they actually are interested in that. So we then had the weekend meetings in Geneva, and the American team in Geneva comprised of Marco Rubio, um, uh, Jared Kushner, and Steve Witkoff. So they, that was the team, and then of course the new member of this team is the Army Secretary Dan Driscoll. Um, the Europeans were not invited; they kind of invited themselves. So they sent their kind of national security advisors, but they weren't invited to the talk. So they just invited themselves, and um, and so they had the meeting and the usual sign of positivity, and then the um, Europeans came up with their own peace plans, and of course we talked about those peace plans earlier in the week, which obviously are non-starters, and the Russians have said that they are absolutely non-starters. Um, but nonetheless, Rubio and his team continue to negotiate with the Ukrainians, and apparently, now they've got something cobbled together. The problem there, of course, is that anything that they cobble together, this, and so the latest talk is now they have a 19-point plan. So as of this moment, when I'm recording this, no one has seen this 19-point plan. People are speculating what's in it, but no one has actually seen the 19-point plan. But they said, well, we whittled down the 28 points down to 19, and then Trump sent out a truth earlier this afternoon. So let us take a look at this truth that he sent out about the progress of the talks. And here it says, over the past week, my team has made tremendous progress with respect to ending the war between Russia and Ukraine. And then, of course, he puts in parentheses, a war that would never have started if I were president. Last month, 25,000 soldiers died. The original 28-point peace plan, which was drafted by the United States, has been fine-tuned. So it's been fine-tuned. So this is clearly we've fine-tuned it to these 19 points has been fine tuned with additional input from both sides, and there are only a few remaining points of disagreement. Um, Now, the problem with whenever Trump says something like a few remaining points of disagreement, remember that's what he said in Anchorage at the joint news conference with Putin. We said, well, we've pretty much got everything settled. There just remains a few minor points of disagreement. So I would, when he says just a few minor points, absolutely, I would take that with a large dose of salt. In the hopes of finalizing this peace plan, I have directed my special envoy, Steve Witkoff, to meet with President Putin in Moscow. And at the same time, Secretary of the Army Dan Driscoll will be meeting with the Ukrainians. So Dan Driscoll is today in Dubai meeting with the Russians. I haven't seen too much news about anything that's transpired in this meeting between Driscoll and the Russians in Dubai. But anyway, since Driscoll will be meeting with the Ukrainians, I will be briefed on all progress made, along with Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, and White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles. Now, this is a very baffling addition. Why is Susie Wiles on this list? I mean, you can see, okay, that's your vice president, yeah. This is your national security team, Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, but Susie Wiles. That is bad news. Susie Wiles is a corporate shill. So it's just, I don't know what the hell she's doing there. Swampy Susie, as I think Robert Barnes calls her. I look forward to hopefully meeting with President Zelensky and President Putin soon, but only when the deal to end the war is final or in its final stages. So it doesn't sound like anything immediately is planned, which is interesting because all the media reports today were that Zelensky was trying to invite himself to the White House over Thanksgiving, but Trump is leaving later today for Mar-a-Lago, so he's not going to be in the White House until I think Sunday evening, and I don't think he's going to invite Zelensky to Mar-a-Lago. So I think that plan of having him seeing Zelensky this week, I don't think that's going to happen. But only when the deal to end this war is final, so there's nothing urgent here, or in its final stages. Thank you for your attention to this important matter, and let's all hope peace can be accomplished as soon as possible. So then it's worth taking a look at, well, first of all, this truth was echoed by Caroline Levitt. She sent out a much briefer version of this message on Twitter. So here's Caroline Levitt says, over the past week, the United States has made tremendous progress towards a peace deal by bringing both Ukraine and Russia to the table. Well, they're not actually at the table. There are a few delicate but not insurmountable details that must be sorted out and will require further talks between Ukraine, Russia, and the United States. So there are delicate but not insurmountable. How did Trump put it? She says delicate but not insurmountable. And he says there are only a few remaining points of disagreement. But she says delicate but not insurmountable. Now, it's always then worth looking at what Axios is saying, because they're usually very well plugged in. So before we get that, this was then a message sent out by Rustem Umerov, who is the defense minister of Ukraine, and he's also echoing the Trump line. We appreciate the productive and constructive meetings held in Geneva between the Ukrainian and U.S. delegations, as well as President Trump's steadfast efforts to end the war. Our delegations reached a common understanding on the core terms of the agreement discussed in Geneva. Now, this is very strange. I mean, you're talking about the core terms of an agreement among whom? I mean, this is an agreement between the Ukraine and the United States. That's nothing. You know, that's very nice, but it's got nothing to do with any agreement to end the war. So core terms of an agreement. So then you got presumably this will be the 19-point plan, but as we'll see in a minute, I mean it doesn't mean anything if the Russians say, well, this isn't serious. We now count on the support of our European partners in our further steps. We look forward to organizing a visit of Ukraine's president to the US at an earliest suitable date in November. So, earliest suitable date in November, that's pretty much Thanksgiving, because once this weekend is over, we're already in December. So that's it. I mean, there's only a few days left in November. So that's the plan, to have Zelensky over in Mar-a-Lago over Thanksgiving turkey. Anyway, this is the story this afternoon from Axios. Zelensky ready to meet Trump over Thanksgiving to finalize deal. And then it says Zelensky wants to meet President Trump as soon as possible to finalize the joint U.S.-Ukraine agreement on terms for ending the war. But again, it's like a U.S.-Ukraine agreement that doesn't end the war. I mean, it's silly to put it like this, on terms for ending the war. It's just, you could say it, that a U.S.-Ukrainian agreement to put forward a joint negotiating position, but that's not going to end the war. Why it matters: U.S. and Ukrainian officials have agreed in principle on most aspects of the plan, which has been modified heavily. That's the adverb heavily there. Heavily from the initial 28-point U.S. proposal. But Zelensky wants to negotiate on the matter of territorial concessions with Trump himself. This is Andrei Yermak, the Zelensky's chief of staff, who is also embroiled in this corruption investigation. So one key issue adapted into the new draft is the security guarantees the U.S. and its European allies would provide Ukraine. And so Yermak says, well, I think it looks very solid. I think it's a historical decision of President Trump and the United States to issue these strong security guarantees, which Ukraine never had before. Again, that's not going to fly, because he's saying U.S. and European allies, essentially, Ukraine would be a member of NATO. I mean, just because it's not going to be a formal member, but a U.S.-Ukraine, U.S.-Europe security guarantees, that's NATO. You can call it whatever you want, but that means it's NATO. Yermak said the security guarantees would be legally binding, and that there had been a positive reaction from the U.S. side to the idea of enshrining them in a formal treaty. Axios reported that the previous draft called on the U.S. and NATO to treat the sustained Russian attack on Ukraine as an attack on the entire transatlantic community. Well, this is very, very interesting, because if that's the case, if they are going to start talking about these security guarantees, the U.S. security guarantees, and this is legally binding. In other words, the United States will go to war on behalf of Ukraine. Now, It's to do that, that would have to that an agreement like that would have to be ratified by the Senate, because that's one serious military commitment on the part of the United States. And that was very interesting because of all the bluster from all the Roger Wickers, Mark Warners, and the rest. Oh, Russia, Ukraine's on the front line. Ukraine. We have to stand by Ukraine, our greatest ally, and whatnot. Are they really going to vote to ratify such an agreement? Are they really going to vote to get the United States involved in a war with Russia in Ukraine? I don't think they're going to do it. It's easy to bluster and to say, "Oh, we're going to take on Putin and whatnot," but if you actually have to vote on it and to ratify such a treaty, because that's a serious thing. It's not the same as, oh, we'll get Montenegro into NATO, because nobody really thinks anyone's going to attack Montenegro. So fine, well, let's have Montenegro. But in these circumstances, I don't think the senators are going to vote for it. That you have to get 67 senators to ratify such an agreement. And I think that's a non-starter, because I think that's such a serious step, and something incidentally that would just guarantee war. I mean, because whichever way this agreement goes, I mean, it's the likelihood of a war between Russia and Ukraine is pretty high. So that means the United States will be committed to going to war against Russia. So we'll have to see how many senators are really going to go down that path of voting to ratify such a treaty. Anyway, then we go back, and then here, the original U.S. plan called for Ukraine to rule out NATO membership and the presence of NATO troops on its soil in exchange for a security guarantee. Yermak said Ukraine wouldn't revoke its constitutional commitment to move towards NATO in the future, but said we are living in a reality now. We are not in NATO. So if that's the case, that within this 19-point plan, Ukraine would still maintain in its constitution its ambition to join NATO, which means NATO would retain in its summit messages that it sends out every year that Ukraine will be a member of NATO. It's a matter of when, not if. They issue that statement every single year. So if that's going to be the case, you then have to wonder, what kind of imbeciles are they to think that this would be remotely acceptable to Russia? Because after all, that was the key to that 28-point plan, which made at least the 28-point plan something that the Russians said, well, we can work with this, because it said Ukraine would absolutely enshrine in its constitution that it will not join NATO, and that NATO and Russia and the NATO itself would enshrine that Ukraine will not become a member, and that NATO would not expand, that there will be no more NATO expansion. All of that was part of that 28-point plan. So if that goes, then what exactly is there here, as kind of an offer to Russia? Yermak said that the 28-point plan had been unacceptable, but that it was already water under the bridge. The current draft now has 19 points, with issues not directly related to peace in Ukraine removed, and several other points amended to be more acceptable for Kiev. And so that's the position from the United States. And as you can see, well, if that's the case, if Yermak, who was involved in these negotiations, if what Yermak is saying is correct, then it's a non-starter. Now, the Europeans had another one of their coalition of the willing meeting. It was via video link. They're very sophisticated. It's by video link. So, um, and Ursula von der Leyen took part, and of course Macron, and so let's first take a look at what Macron said at today's coalition of the willing meeting. You have to excuse his English. Or his accent is so strong, very hard. Very no, that's not this. Um, he so he can speak English, but it's almost incomprehensible um, understanding him. So let's just listen to uh, Emmanuel, as Keir Starmer calls him. He calls everyone by their first name. Emmanuel, Emmanuel, or what do you think, Emmanuel? Um, anyway, let's listen to a little bit of Macron.
Secretary General, we've always expressed our support to the American efforts to put an end to this war. And we are united in support for a just, dignified, and lasting peace for Ukraine that would preserve its sovereignty and ensure its long-term security. Any step that is taking us further down this path is a welcome step. It was particularly important in my view that Europeans and allies were also present in Geneva and able to make their views known. And decisions with implications for Europe and NATO interests need the joint support of European partners and NATO allies respectively. And we are all very clear on that. And obviously I'm not forgetting our friends from Japan, Australia, New Zealand, who are staunch partner for Ukraine and also share our determination to make sure that any peace deal strengthens our rule-based order and not undermine it further. We are clearly at a crucial juncture. Negotiations are getting a new impetus, and we should seize this momentum, not because there is reason for alarm. Ukraine is solid, Russia is slow, and Europe is steadfast, but because there is finally a chance to make real progress toward it. But the absolute condition for a good peace is a set of very robust security guarantees.
So he said, if you didn't pick it up, it's very hard to pick up. The very robust. That's the NATO word. Very robust. It has to be robust. Robust security guarantees. So it's these robust security guarantees they're going to be providing to Ukraine. I mean, even though Russia has said we're not going to accept NATO forces on Ukrainian soil. So I don't know what he means by a very robust. But anyway, so
Not paper guarantees.
paper
Ukraine
guarantees.
has had its share of promises that were shattered by successive Russian aggressions, and real, rock-solid guarantees are a necessity.
So now it's rock solid guarantees. So rock solid guarantees. So not paper guarantees, rock solid. So remember we talked about this French general who said the other day that the French have to be ready to sacrifice their children in the coming war with Russia. That's the same. He's the head of the France's armed forces, and he also said, I think, a couple of weeks ago, that France and Russia will be at war sometime within the next 3-4 years. So and this man, this head of the France's armed forces, was berating the French for being soft, having the soft underbelly, that they weren't willing to sacrifice their children in this war against Russia. But you see, he got criticized for making this speech, which itself was quite extraordinary. I mean, how can you have a military man making these kinds of blustery interjections into politics? I mean, a military man, you're supposed to take orders. Because the French are getting soft. They're not willing to make sacrifices in the upcoming war against Russia. Um, anyway, let's listen to this great man a little bit more.
And this is, I would say, the core mission of this coalition of the willing. So I suggest to divide our meeting into two parts, if you agree. I will give the floor to Kier right now, and after that, perhaps we could have an intervention from Volodymyr to debrief us about the discussions in Geneva and the state of the art of the discussion. And second, we could focus on how the coalition can best contribute in this context to provide those robust security guarantees for Ukraine. And we
he repeats again, robust security guarantees. Just in case we didn't hear it the first time. Robust security guarantees.
Could conclude with the next steps, if you all agree. Just a note of caution before.
No, we seem to have lost the audio, but I don't think that's my. That's I think that was it. Okay, all right. So that's Macron, and that was his contribution. Robust, rock solid security guarantees. Got to be ready to do all this for Ukraine. No. As always, never any explanation as to why. Why does the European continent have to go to war on behalf of Ukraine against Russia? Why? Since when has Ukraine been some vital security interest of Europe? All those years it was a part of the Soviet Union. No one seemed to care very much about Ukraine, and it's not a member of NATO, it's not a member of the EU, but nonetheless, it's all, they all just repeat this as like a mantra that somehow the fate of humanity that it depends on Ukraine. And then Keir Starmer chimed in with one of his excruciatingly banal speeches, and here is this PM remarks on the coalition of the willing, 25th of November. And here he is. And they said the principles have always been driven by Ukraine should be able to defend itself in future. Hugely important. Ukraine's sovereignty must be maintained, and that matters about Ukraine and its future must be determined by Ukraine. Now, right away, whenever they say something like that, this is complete nonsense because, in fact, Ukraine's future is being entirely determined by other powers, such as the coalition of the willing. And hey, you sabotaged the peace deal that was on the table in April 2022. So Ukraine doesn't have any sovereignty. You are the ones who are making the decision for Ukraine. Secondly, we should keep up our work on preparing robust security guarantees. So again, you'll notice that they all say the same kind of words. It's like hybrid war. Nobody knows what that means. It's a hybrid war. Russia's waging a hybrid war. But it sounds good. So robust. So it was a nice word, robust. As Emmanuel has said, my good friend Emmanuel, as Emmanuel has said, that's the driving purpose behind this coalition. And security guarantees was an important element of the draft US plan. Now, the strange thing is, you say on one hand, Ukraine should be able to defend itself in the future, and then you say, oh, but security guarantees. So you're saying basically, well, Ukraine can't defend itself, and it has to be defended by somebody else. I mean, which is it? But because they don't really explain, and so it sounds, oh yeah, well that sounds right. But there's an obvious contradiction. Either you're saying Ukraine should be able to defend itself. In other words, you're kind of on your own, like, as everybody is, or your security guarantees, which means we will undertake to fight on behalf of Ukraine. Because Ukraine needs real reassurance that Russia cannot come again in the future. So when we say peace, it must be lasting peace. That will not happen if we don't have robust security guarantees. How many times are you going to say that? So, the fourth time, and that's just simply these two, Macron and Starmer. Robust security guarantees. So we need to prepare the planning and financing to build Ukraine's future force so it can defend itself. Okay, so it can defend itself, but it has to have these robust security guarantees, which means we're going to be doing the defending. The multinational force Ukraine will be a vital part of this. So it's multinational. Ukraine is going to defend itself, but it's going to be a multinational force. It's so ridiculous. I mean, these contradictions are so ridiculous, and no one ever really points any of this out. Say, oh, we're going to fight for Ukraine. Our military planners, who have worked really hard in recent months, will continue to work on the readiness of that force. Okay, so again, our military planners, so that's the British military planners, working really hard, and they will be working on this force. And I urge colleagues on the call this afternoon to firm up national commitments, because we need to ensure we've got the most robust capability, that word again, robust, fifth time, and the most robust, number six, plans on the table. And we will also pick up next steps with the US military on their own planning. So now the United States is already also involved. That's interesting. So is Trump on board with this? I mean, Trump, the non-interventionist, Trump, let's stay out of foreign wars. Now the U.S. military is involved in this planning. And we must come back to this with a strong political guarantees to show Russia we're serious about responding to any violation. And it's only if Russia believes we are serious to responding to any violation that this will underpin a lasting peace. And it's great that the US have made progress on drafting this in recent days. Third point, we need to keep the pressure on Russia, of course. We must move forward with a full embargo on Russian energy. We know, and we shouldn't underestimate, that the measures we have taken over the last few weeks have already had an impact, including the most recent US sanctions on oil majors. Finally and crucially, so he's not going to say robust again. Finally and crucially, and I know I've said this a number of times before, colleagues, but we must never lose sight as we strive for a ceasefire. Yeah, they've been a little quiet about this ceasefire, the unconditional ceasefire. We never lose sight as we strive for a ceasefire and a just and lasting peace that we must support Ukraine right now. It's a big mistake, in my view, to take our eye off the ball and focus only on the future. Must support Ukraine now. We must support Ukraine now. We must. So even as we work towards peace, and we are there, there can be no letting up of support to keep Ukraine in the fight. So to keep Ukraine in the fight. Let's continue with this war. So, all the talk about peace, we're talking about peace, it's all fraud. That's low letting up of support to keep Ukraine in the fight, keeping the war going. And that requires urgent solutions on things like financing and capability, and you know where this is going. And I know on financing, Ursula and Antonio, their teams are working pretty well around the clock now, and I know EU leaders are looking at this in the next few weeks where progress is being made. where the UK is ready to move with the EU on providing financial support based on the value of the immobilized assets. That's it, the immobilized assets. This is the best way to show Putin he should negotiate rather than trying to outweigh us. So we're back to the same thing with unconditional ceasefire, apply more pressure, and then Putin will negotiate. I thought we were on the point of a peace deal, and he's not. Now apparently we're going to force Putin to negotiate. And it's the best way for us to be ready to support Ukraine in war or in peace. And of course, we need to keep supporting Ukraine's defense. Ukraine is holding the line fearlessly, and it's the line of their sovereignty and their defense. But it's also our line as well, because this is about European freedom, our values, and our security. Our values. I was getting worried that we're not hearing about values anymore. Our values and our security. So Ukraine is out there fighting for our values and our security. But of course, that immediately raises the question, and Ukraine, reasonably enough, does raise that question. Well, if Ukraine is holding the line fearlessly, and it's also our line as well, because this is about European values, European freedom, our values, and our security. Well, why aren't you then sending your own forces to go fight there? You can't just say, well, this is the future of our civilization is at stake in Ukraine, but actually you're not prepared to send your own people to go die there. So they need our support more so we're just willing to the support, and the support, we'll send you hardware. Oh, and we'll steal these immobilized assets, so that we can do that, but we're not actually going to sacrifice anything of our own. So, we need to support the cities, and so the UK will deliver more air defense missiles in the coming weeks. And I urge everyone in that spirit to dig deep and see what more support you can provide, particularly now as we go into the winter. So that's we got to dig deep. That's really nice. You're going to start digging deep. Well, you know, I mean, the British people, they're not exactly having a great time of it. With their with austerity. Nor are the French, nor is anyone in Europe having a great time. But apparently, they have to dig deep to to keep Ukraine in the fight. But Ukrainians have to do the fighting. We're not actually going to do the fighting. So it's all about let's you and him fight. You and him. I'll hold your jacket. And so that was Keir, our friend Keir, and now that's another friend, Ursula von der Leyen, who was also in on this meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. Today, the partners of the Coalition of the Willing convene to discuss ongoing negotiations towards a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. Notice how they've got this formula down, the just and lasting peace. In recent days and hours, we have seen solid and encouraging progress. Now, the moment you hear Ursula von der Leyen saying solid and encouraging, you know that is bad news. If Ursula von der Leyen thinks it's solid and encouraging, then you know the last thing that we're getting close to is peace. I mean, these are all people who want to keep the war going. So therefore, whatever these negotiations that are taking place between the Americans and the Ukrainians, it's all really about sabotaging any possibility of an accord, which was what we were talking about last week, the 28-point plan. So if she's saying, solid and encouraging progress, in other words, the plan is in the waste paper basket, and we're not going to have to deal with any possible peace agreements. And we can then talk about our 20th round of sanctions, cutting us off from Russian, totally from Russian energy, cracking down on Russian disinformation, the familiar routine. We welcome the presence of U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio during our call. Um, Also, yeah, okay, that's it. I didn't see this that he had actually called during the coalition of the willing. So we welcomed him. Hello, Marco. How's it going? Um, we need strong transatlantic cooperation because it delivers. Take the significant impact of our coordinated and successive waves of sanctions against the Russian economy. They are shrinking the resources Russia has to wage its war of aggression. Um, and since pressure remains the only language Russia responds to, but I love it when they say this. uh, Russia hasn't responded to this. This is why this is your 20th round of sanctions, because they haven't responded. They haven't done any good. I mean, if you have 19 rounds of sanctions, I mean, Scott Bessent was right. I mean, if you have to do something 19 times, then that's an admission of failure. So he says, well, the pressure remains the only language Russia responds to. Well, you've been applying pressure, and Russia hasn't responded. We will, and then was, oh, Russia isn't serious about peace. So they say, oh, Russia responds to pressure. At the same time, they say Russia isn't serious about peace. Well, obviously, Russia isn't responding to the pressure. I mean, they mouth these cliches, and they don't even think about what they're actually saying. I mean, it's so stupid that they completely contradict themselves, but they've been mouthing the same nonsense year in, year out. And then there's always this momentary panic when they think, oh, Trump is going to pull out. Oh, like, oh, we have to huddle with the Trump people and make sure that they stay on board. So Russia remains the only language Russia responds to. We will continue to increase it until there's a genuine willingness to engage on a credible path towards peace. So, we apply pressure, it'll bring Putin to the negotiating table. Genuine willingness. So your pressure hasn't worked. And you're saying it there. Oh, pressure remains the only language Russia responds to. Oh, and we're going to do it until there's a genuine willingness to engage on a credible path towards peace, even though basically they're not responding to your pressure and they're not going to accept what you're offering. I mean, they've made it clear. I mean, how many times can they say the same thing? They're not going to accept what you're offering. As Europe and its partners are fully engaged in the search for a just and sustainable peace, last night Russia escalated its attacks on Kiev with missiles and drones, and even violating Moldovan and Romanian airspace. Says who? And it is yet another reminder that Ukraine's security is Europe's security. Ukraine's interests are our interests. All right, well, you have 7 children. Send them to go fight in Ukraine. Not a single one of von der Leyen's children, not one of her 7 children, not one is served in the military. And that's just in peacetime. I see, you think, it's kind of just extraordinary, that, and she's very pleased with herself that oh well, they haven't served in the military, and then they are inseparable. That is why we will continue to stand firmly by Ukraine in the negotiations ahead. A central point is the question of financing for Ukraine, including the use of the immobilized Russian sovereign assets. It's a central point. Of course, it's a central point. If we can get our hands on an additional 140 billion euros, we can keep this show on the road for another 2-3 years. So that was von der Leyen with blathering her nonsense. But you can see that there was as always there was the panic last week when the 28-point plan dropped, Now they're calming down, because Marco Rubio is basically there to sabotage any possibility of a deal, and they talk the same language. Um, and which is all that they're really concerned with. I see Marty is with us. I think, Marty, I mean, you're such a brilliant, indefatigable researcher. I think you may find on YouTube there's an interview that von der Leyen gave, I think a few years ago, in which I think she was asked whether any of her children have served in the military. And she kind of chuckles, nope, not one of them. And she seemed very pleased with herself, I mean, so yeah. Oh, we're gonna we're gonna in the fight. We're gonna fight the Russians. Not my children, your children. Um, and anyway, so that's the coalition of coalition of the willing. So and then it might be just worth taking a look at the Russian response. I mean, the Russians have really said very little over the past week. So the we have Ushakov, who's Putin's aide. He made a statement. So and then Lavrov also made a statement. So let's see what Ushakov, Putin's man, said about these peace talks. And here we have this is from TASS. Putin's schedule and U.S. peace plan for Ukraine, what the Kremlin aide said. And then Russian presidential aide Yuri Ushakov supposes that the United States will contact Russia soon to personally discuss the details of the peace plan for Ukraine, although there are no specific arrangements yet. He said the Kremlin is aware of the EU's peace plan, but its provisions are not constructive and do not suit Russia. So he issued this statement, after this this frenetic activity over the weekend of the European peace plans. I think there are something like 3 European peace plans. All of them are quite ridiculous. And as I said, he said the Kremlin is aware of the EU's peace plan. As I said, that there's more than one, but its provisions are not constructive and do not suit Russia. And then many provisions of the U.S. peace plan for Ukraine discussed in Alaska are acceptable to Russia. I would not say all. I would say not all, but many provisions of this plan, they seem quite acceptable to us. So this is the Russian line, which is, hey, we had these agreements in Alaska, and then the Americans kind of walk back on that. Russia is familiar with the original version of the U.S. peace plan, but there have been no specific negotiations on it. So, and there's a direct quote, there are many other versions out there. Now, I'm speaking specifically about the version that we have reviewed. But I want to emphasize again, in addition to what the president said, he clearly said that, yes, we have seen this version of the plan, but no one has conducted any specific negotiations with Russian representatives on the matter. So that, I mean, I think that somebody presented them with that plan, the 28-point plan. I think it's more than just what we read in the media. So I'm speaking specifically about the version that we have reviewed, but I want to emphasize again, He clearly said that yes, we have seen this version of the plan, but no one has conducted any specific negotiations with Russian representatives on this matter. So we were shown the plan. So it's more than just simply we saw the version of the plan, in the media, but there'd been no negotiations. And then it says there's a lot of speculation about the peace plan for Ukraine. Moscow believes only the information received directly from Washington. We believe in what we saw, what was transmitted to us through the appropriate channels. So that's it. So that was transmitted to us. They showed us the plan through their appropriate channels. The Kremlin assumes that the United States will contact Russia soon to discuss the details of the peace plan in person, although there are no specific agreements yet. I would proceed from the fact that it would probably be natural to assume that the Americans would come in to meet us face to face and start a discussion. Yeah, well, Trump then issued that truth that we looked at earlier, saying that Witkoff is going to Moscow to meet Putin. The Kremlin is aware of the existence of a European peace plan for Ukraine, which at first glance is completely unconstructive and does not suit Russia. And then here's Lavrov, and it's kind of lengthy. He was answering questions to the media. But what I think is the interesting, he said, again, he talks about Anchorage. After Anchorage, when we thought these understandings had already been formalized, there was a long pause, and now it has been interrupted by the introduction of this document. We have it, but through official channels, it has not been officially submitted to us. I don't understand that. We have it, but through unofficial channels. Well, that's different from what Ushakov said. Ushakov said that it was through official channels. So it has not been officially submitted to us. So I don't. They seem to be saying something different. But we are naturally ready, as President Putin said, to discuss specific formulations. A number of issues require clarification. So far, we haven't received the version of events from our American colleagues that's being speculated about in the media. Those engaged in megaphone diplomacy are pursuing far from the most noble of goals. And then Emmanuel Macron spoke and said that Donald Trump's plan is unacceptable because it constitutes capitulation to Russia. Others are making similar statements, claiming that everything should depend on Ukraine's willingness to accept or reject this or that agreement. So anyway, and then we have channels of communications with our American colleagues. They are being used. We are awaiting their version, which they consider an interim one, in terms of completing the phase of coordinating this text with the Europeans and the Ukrainians. Then we will see. Because if the spirit and letter of the Anchorage Agreement on the key understandings we recorded are erased, it will be a fundamentally different situation. So that's what it's saying. Because if the spirit and letter of the Anchorage Agreement on the key understandings we recorded are erased, it will be a fundamentally different situation. So in other words, yeah, if you go down this path of this 19-point plan incorporating the ideas of the Europeans, then we're not going to get anywhere. So that's the Russian position, entirely understandable. Oh, Marty, I just saw Marty. This is what Marty has done here is quite interesting. This was this a very no, I don't that no that was that's the seven children. Yeah, no, I thought it was you were going to do the which I think you've done that before, where this very peculiar TV show that was that her? Maybe I'm getting it mixed up now. But didn't she take part in some kind of a TV show in which she got into a box with little children and and then she had to be lifted up and taken out of the box. It was very, very strange. I think that was, I think, before she became president of the EU Commission. So I think that's a much younger um, Ursula von der Leyen with her adorable little children, all looking very sweet German children, as she does herself. She looked very, very sweet, wholesome, kind of, German woman. I mean, that's not what she is, but if you looked at her, you say, oh, that's a nice one. But I want to, because I'm a kind of, um, I have a certain sadistic streak. I want to, I want to show, um, yes, the Kemi Badenoch, who's the Conservative Party um, leader, and what she said in Parliament today, apropos of Ukraine, because this is Kemi Badenoch. Let's listen to her a little bit. Um,
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement? We are proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, and our support remains unwavering. Ukraine is battling the most flagrant breach of territorial integrity in Europe in recent times. We must never forget that this war was started by Putin, who is trying to extinguish a democracy on our own continent. It is important that we stand together to defend the principle that aggressors should not succeed. The previous Conservative government led Europe in support for Ukraine. We were the first country to provide modern Western main battle tanks and to gift munitions and Storm Shadow missiles. We led the way on sanctions and trained tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers on UK soil. It is now incumbent on this government to leverage British influence at this crucial time for the West. Putin's relentless bombardment of Kyiv and KGB-style negotiating tactics show he is not serious about peace.
But notice how, and this was true about Starmer and all the rest, they always personalize this. It's always Putin does this, Putin does that. Um, I think, well, hey, these are all. I mean, nobody says, "Oh, it is just Keir Starmer does it. Everything is Starmer." You have a government, but they always personalize it. Oh, Putin. But Kiev, get with the cliche in.
Which is why Russia must not be welcomed back into the international fold without a comprehensive peace agreement. So will the Prime Minister rule out support for readmitting Russia to the G7? We all want.
All right, so that's the whole issue of the G7 is a bizarre thing. It's a Trumpian issue that somehow, Russia should be readmitted and become the G8 again. I don't think Russia has the slightest interest in joining the G7 for a very obvious reason, because in every meeting is going to be 7-1. It's all because the seven are all either NATO member states or basically satellites of NATO, such as Japan. So it's all NATO plus Russia. Why would you join any organization where you're always going to be outvoted 7-1? So this is just simply Trump bringing this up as and so Russia doesn't want this, and of course nobody on the G7 is going to want this either. So it was a total waste of time. But she comes, will you make a commitment here that Russia is not going to be admitted into the into the G7? Anyway, let's take a look at our Gaggle locals page. So this is our community that makes sure that the dogs are kind of kept on an even keel, because they do tend to they get very difficult, and then then when they're not happy, they think that they're not being adequately compensated, and so anyway, thank you so much, everyone who's members of our community and who post regularly on our locals page. And Danaki is a great poster, so thank you. Danaki says, Kedves George, dear George, is there peace yet, Marco? So, as we were saying, Marco's job is to make sure there is no agreement. I mean, that's the task that he set himself. He is making a a presidential run. He's going to make a presidential run as the neocon, as he is a neocon, has always been a neocon, but he is going to show that he's also a loyal trooper. He was very loyal to Trump. A lot of MAGA people, mistrusted him, but he says, "Look, I always supported Trump. I always, I never questioned anything he wanted." But his task is to make sure that that this peace deal never gets off the ground, and that's really very important, because if this plan fails, and I think it's looking like it's going to fail, this not this reworked plan, because remember that 28-point plan, and we went over it in some detail last week, but even as this plan stands, it's very there's a lot there that was just unacceptable to the Russians. So for the Russians even to start thinking about that as the framework, they would have to make an enormous number of concessions. But if but now you made it even less palatable to the Russians. So it's not on. But if that happens, if essentially, within the next few days, it completely collapses, and then Trump, in a fit of fury, says, "Well, I'm going to get even tougher with the Russians because they're not playing ball with me." If that's what happens, this will be the third failure on the part of Trump when it comes to Ukraine. So we had the anchorage when it seemed like they had an agreement in the works. That collapsed within days when all the Europeans and Zelensky trooped off to Washington. Then we had the Trump-Putin telephone conversation and their agreement to meet in Budapest sometime really within the next few weeks to get a deal done. And Orban was, of course, there, celebrating that he's going to be the mediator. So that's number two. And now this would be the 28-point plan would be number three. So that's three failures. That's serious business. I mean, if you fail three times, with the peace agreements, then it kind of looks really like you're you have no ability to deliver, and he doesn't. He doesn't, because he doesn't realize that there's only one way you can get this peace done, and that is you have to apply the pressure on Ukraine. I mean, you're just going to have to tell them they have to bite the bullet. If they don't accept your peace plan, then that's it. You're cutting them off from all intelligence sharing. You're going to cut them off from weapon systems, even though the Europeans are paying for it. They can say, "Well, no, we're not going to sell you this. We're not going to sell you that. We need this. We need that." You basically just make sure that Ukraine doesn't get anything. No military hardware. Whether the Europeans are willing to pay for it or not. No military hardware. No intelligence. That's the only way you can do it. I mean, it's the same as when Nixon, managed to get a deal on Vietnam. The key was not applying pressure on Hanoi. I mean, they'd been doing that for years and years. I mean, they'd been applying pressure on Hanoi. The key was applying pressure on Saigon and making clear that if you don't take this deal, we're basically cutting you off. Now, admittedly, for Nixon, this wasn't really that difficult because by 1972, the American policymaking elite, American political class, the media were all sick to death of the Vietnam War, and so they were very happy, really, when Nixon applied pressure on Saigon to get the Paris Agreement signed. So there, that was a popular move on Nixon's part. In Trump's case, of course, applying pressure on Ukraine was very unpopular among America's policymaking elite, and of course, unpopular among the media. So he gets a lot of bad press. But unless he does that, then there's not going to be a deal. And so it looks very much like, we've done this, we've been here before. It's a deja vu all over again. He comes up with the 28-point plan. Then he starts negotiating with Ukraine. And then it's whittled down to the 19 points. And then, we were quoting what Yermak said. So yeah, this is fantastic. We're not giving up anything. Thank you very much. Now, admittedly, we haven't yet seen the 19 points, but the 28 points were not really acceptable to Russia. Now that you got it down to this the 19, and the Ukrainians have agreed to it, then this ain't gonna happen. But anyway, thank you very much, Denoke and Psinok. Thank you, Psinok, and thank you very much for your generosity. And Psinok says, hello, so it's a 19-point plan now. Thanks for all you do. Well, thank you very much, Psinok, and thank you for all of your contributions, your generosity. Yeah, it's 19 points. We haven't seen it yet, but it's pretty much a non-starter. I mean, I just from the various suggestions that we have heard. I mean, we looked at what the Ukrainians were saying. We looked at what the Europeans are saying. And presumably the Europeans are hearing from Zelensky, because Zelensky took part in this coalition of the willing video conference. And presumably he told them, well, this is what the state of play in the negotiations. So they're all very happy. Starmer's happy, Macron's happy, Ursula von der Leyen is happy. So it's we're all happy. Why are we happy? Because the war can go on. We've got big smiles on our faces because the war goes on. We're not the ones who are dying; they are dying. So that's fantastic. And of course, when we listen to Kemi Badenoch, and she says, "Oh, they're a democracy. They're a democracy." How much say are Ukrainians having in the continuation of the war? Zelensky was supposed to have stepped aside or run for re-election in 2024. Well, so that's we're reaching almost 2 years since he was supposed to run for re-election. So what kind of a democracy are we talking about? So the Ukrainians are not having any say as to whether they want to continue with this war. It's a democracy, which means we have to make sure, EU style, that the public has as little say as possible in whether it's going to continue with the war, even though the polls have shown that Ukraine is sick to death of this war and wants this war to end. But luckily, there are no elections, and even more luckily, no one is pressing Ukraine to hold elections. And so, Marty, here's a picture from Anchorage, and this is Putin shouting, "Hey, Marco!" That was a kind of an odd part of it when he was shouting. Do we? I don't know. Do we actually know what it was he was shouting? But but yeah, that was that was at Anchorage. So so nice picture. Um, and Stone River, very good to see you. Thank you very much, Stone River, for your generosity. And Stone River says, Ursula et al. Never tire of decrying the unilateral shifting of borders, but EU and NATO dissolve borders in a more subtle way without a shot being fired or a popular vote being cast. Well, the the borders don't really mean anything. I mean, if they have these Schengen, um, regime, basically that's it. I mean, the entirety of the European continent is available to the Brussels regime, and you have to get with the program. Hey, we're moving forces around. We don't have any time for any EU member state complaining and saying we don't really want a whole tank column crossing our country. People might get frightened seeing a column of tanks heading towards the east. But I guess when you say EU and NATO dissolve borders in a more subtle way, there was nothing subtle in the way they dissolved the borders of Yugoslavia, and then, of course, the way they stole Kosovo from Serbia. They knew exactly what they were doing in the case of Yugoslavia, because they knew that by recognizing the individual republics of Yugoslavia within their administrative boundaries. I mean, they were just these are entirely arbitrary administrative boundaries drawn up by the communists during World War II, but making those boundaries international frontiers, they were essentially guaranteeing war. And they knew that they were doing something illegal, and it was obviously illegal by any measure in international law, which is you don't recognize unilateral secession. You simply can't do it. And the individual republics, we've talked about this before, the individual republics made no effort to negotiate any of their grievances or negotiate the terms of their exit from Yugoslavia. So if you think of the sequence of events, first elections are held in Yugoslavia, the first post-communist elections are held in 1990. June the 25th, 1991, Croatia and Slovenia declare their independence. So there's absolutely no time whatsoever for the negotiations. And then immediately, from June 25th, 1991, immediately the EU jumped in and made clear that they had every intention, particularly the Germans, that they had every intention of recognizing the republics as legitimate successor states of Yugoslavia. And but they did something even more even more disgusting. It wasn't just that they recognized the individual republics as successor states, when there was really no basis whatever for that. They didn't have any proper constitutional procedure for seceding, for holding referendums on secession or anything like that. But the one entity that they didn't recognize was actually the core of Yugoslavia that wanted to stay as Yugoslavia. So they said, okay, yeah, Croatia, boom, independent state. Slovenia, yeah, independent state. Bosnia and Herzegovina, yeah, independent state. And they would have done it in the case of Macedonia. The only reason they didn't do it in the case of Macedonia because the Greeks said, no, we don't accept that, because Macedonia is Greece. You can't go around calling yourself Macedonia because Macedonia is Greece. So they didn't do that one. Um, but the core of Yugoslavia, which is comprising um, Serbia and Montenegro, they absolutely refused to recognize it because they said, no, that's you're a this is a new state. You are not the successor state to Yugoslavia, and as a reward, Yugoslavia got kicked out of the United Nations because hey, you can't hold on to your seat at the United Nations because you're not the successor state to the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. So, just to answer your question, Stone River, there was no subtlety about that. I mean, they moved ahead. They ignored all of the accepted norms of international law in recognizing these unilateral secessions, and then they just to put the cherry on the cake, they refused to recognize the core of Yugoslavia, and it was the core because it was easily the biggest part of Yugoslavia. They refused to recognize that as the successor state of Yugoslavia, and it's very interesting because when they did that, the EU and NATO did that. They abandoned all of the norms um, that in the past, because for instance, when when Bangladesh, well, there was the civil war between West Pakistan and East Pakistan, and essentially then East Pakistan seceded and became Bangladesh. The international community still accepted West Pakistan as the successor state of Pakistan. So there's the state of Pakistan that had existed before 1971, which comprised these two entities, West Pakistan, East Pakistan, separated by thousands of miles in India. But they still said West Pakistan is the successor state to Pakistan, and but even though Bangladesh, East Pakistan was much bigger, so the biggest part of Pakistan had actually seceded, but so the smaller part remained, and they still said the smaller part, West Pakistan, is the successor state. They didn't say, oh, well, West Pakistan, that's a brand new state. You need to reapply for UN membership. So anyway, there's not. So anyway, my point is that there was nothing subtle about what NATO and the EU did. Absolutely redrawn the borders, and they did that with Kosovo. The only reason why the theft of Kosovo, and it's just outright theft. They bombed Serbia in 1999, took Kosovo away from Serbia, and then moved almost immediately to try to create a state of an independent state in Kosovo. And then, of course, in 2008, when Kosovo declared independence, of course, the usual characters, NATO and the EU and the United States, of course, rushed to recognize the independent Kosovo. But the reason why that didn't work, and they were hoping that it would work, was that it was so blatant. The unilateral secession was just so blatant that there were European countries that refused to go along with it. So Spain, which has its own issues with secessionists, Spain refused to go along with it. Greece, which also has a Albanian problem, Greece refused to go along with it. Cyprus, which has its own problem with the Turkish Cypriots, they refused to go along with it, and so Kosovo has remained in limbo. I mean, they take part in international competition, sporting competition. They shouldn't, but they managed to get them into that. But they have no prospect of getting any kind of international acceptance. They don't have membership of the United Nations. They can't join the EU, and they can't join NATO because there'll be member states are going to just object to that. Um, but so I don't know. There's nothing subtle about what the EU and NATO do, but they dress it all up in this phony, smarmy way about human rights and democracy and freedom. They don't couldn't care less about any of those things. Anyway, thank you, Stone River, and then Marty. Well, that's an interesting picture. I have. This is Marty has given us a picture of the elder Bush with a pistol in his left hand, and I don't know. I mean, this was already after he was no longer president. I mean, I'm assuming he was already. This is after he was he had left office because he looks older here. I mean, but he has this pistol in his hand, and I'm not quite sure why. That's an interesting picture. So thank you, Marty. Really, um, it's funny. I mean, he was. I saw something from George H.W. Bush. It was I think it was on somewhere YouTube or wherever I saw it. His response to the opening of the Berlin Wall. So that was on November the 9th, 1989. And he was extraordinary in his how inarticulate he was. I mean, when you think, I mean, he's been in politics um, all of his life. I mean, he was in Congress, he ran for the Senate, and of course, he was vice president. After running for president, he was vice president for 8 years, and then, but he seemed incapable of explaining his position. I mean, so what his view was on the opening of the Berlin Wall. Just extraordinary, and he was always like that. He was just extraordinarily inarticulate. He was a very smart guy. I mean, there's no question he was far smarter than his son. Um, but if those who will remember the Bush years, it was grating having to listen to him. It was just so boring to hear him speak, and really boring to have to listen to his halting way of speaking, his inarticulateness, his broken sentences. It was going from one thought to another, never really presenting anything in any coherent way. It was just grating having to listen to that for 4 years. Anyway, thank you so much, Marty. Anne-Marie, always very good to see you. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for your generosity. As I always say, Anne-Marie is our musical celebrity here. She's performed in best orchestras in the world. She continues to perform among the best orchestras in the world, and she continues to perform very great pieces of music. And she's worked with outstanding conductors, outstanding musical performance. Anytime we post something in our on our locals page, she was like, "Oh yeah, I worked with this person. I worked with that person. I'm always in awe. Wow, you worked with this conductor or that conductor." And Anne-Marie always contributes very, very insightful, really, really brilliant commentary on the music that we post as part of the Gaggle music clubs. Because she writes as someone who knows these works inside out, and she knows exactly what's involved in performing very difficult pieces of music. So it's always such a treat to listen to her comments and talking about how what happened when she performed and this piece of music, or and what she thinks of it in comparison with other pieces of music. I mean, it's always just fascinating. I always learn so much from it. So I'm really, really thankful to as we all are, for Anne Marie's contributions. And so thank you. And I posted today for the Gaggle Music Club Saint-Saëns' um, second piano concerto. I don't think it's a great piece of music, but it's an interesting piece of music. And so I hope at some point, if Anne Marie has the time, she can, um, tell us what she thinks of that piece of music, and and really where that is to be found in Saint-Saëns' work as a whole. Because with Saint-Saëns, I mean, we always think of the organ symphony, which I've posted before, and that is a great piece of music. Or we think of the Carnival of the Animals, which is a great favorite. Children love it, and so on. So, but this is a kind of Saint-Saëns that people may not know so well. So anyway, thank you so much, Anne Marie. Really appreciate your generosity. Cynthia is also a great contributor to our pages, because she's a film scholar with an encyclopedic knowledge of cinema, and she always has some insightful observations about films, the films that we play here on the Gaggle, but also films that we haven't had a chance to play. So she always brings her breadth of knowledge and always fascinating, intriguing insights into films, and her very interesting, always stimulating aesthetic judgments on films. And so whenever we do this weekly screening, we're always very fortunate to have Cynthia's running commentary, which is just amazingly informed and illuminating to go with the film. So, it's, as I always say, we watch an extraordinary film, and then we have the good fortune of enjoying Cynthia's encyclopedic knowledge and her background information. So we get a very, very richer experience in watching this the film. So it's like we watch the film and we learn so much more about the making of the film, and what to think of it. So it's like I always think I miss so much from when I first see the film, but now when I read Cynthia, so now I see what I missed. Anyway, thank you, Cynthia, for that. I really, really appreciate your generosity of your time and everything. So thank you. Anyway, Cynthia says, so yesterday we had Elmer Gantry, major film from 1960 with Oscars, and it's still on our locals board. So all our members can enjoy the film, and as I say, read Cynthia's extraordinary informative analyses on to go with the film. Anyway, so Cynthia says, I've always known Christian Zionists kowtow to Israel in order to secure their place in heaven. Yes. But after hearing Elmer Gantry's evangelical sermon on Christ in commerce, it dawned on me that they also kowtow to Israel, and perhaps even more so, in hopes they'll be blessed with immense wealth, just like so many Jewish Zionists are blessed with that. That's rooted in the old adage, we become the company we keep. In fact, Trump might share that same mentality. Any thoughts on that? Well, that's very interesting. It's always been a part of that kind of evangelical view that Christ was a very good businessman. He knew, and I think that has been a part of going business and evangelicism. We were always going together because that's hey, you get closer to Christ, and Christ just he got people working. He got people to believe things. He got things organized. And I think there's always been that aspect of it, that this is that the most successful businessman of all time was Jesus Christ. I mean, he started off with these 12 apostles, and hey, that quickly spread, and they they got a church going, a very wealthy church, became extremely rich, it became extremely powerful, and said, well, that was all thanks to Jesus Christ. So I think he's always been seen as the very, very successful businessman. And I think that, if one goes back um, to the heyday of revivalism, you always find that theme of Christ as the successful businessman. If you want to be successful in business, follow the teachings of Christ, and that came out in the film yesterday. I mean, all of those very successful businessmen, they're all making a lot of money, but they're also the people running the churches. So they kind of, it blended together their successful businesses with the with making money through their churches. So it's a that's very really insightful of you, Cynthia. Um, the I mean, I think the interesting, I mean, thing here is that yeah, as I say, these evangelicals, yeah, I mean, they're all of them, I mean, they all saw this as a way to make a lot of money, even though they may have thought that gantry was vulgar, but initially they were just concerned that his vulgarity was going to put people off, and therefore they wouldn't be making money. Once they saw how successful he was, they immediately embraced him. That their initial wariness about gantry disappeared once they saw how much money he could raise. I mean, all of it was about raising this money. So, hey, we could use this guy Gantry. He's raising money for us. And also, I think, Cynthia, you probably saw the with Mike Huckabee, one of the worst of the Christian Zionists, and awful person. Even though when I wasn't really aware of the extremity of his Christian Zionist, I always thought he was rather witty. He has a certain cleverness, and was quite funny, but he's just a terrible person. But there he met Jonathan Pollard in the embassy in Israel, and Trump has done nothing about it. He has said nothing about it. He has not addressed the issue. So, hey, this person, was responsible for the worst betrayal of American secrets ever, and you've got nothing to say about it. You call Marjorie Taylor Greene Marjorie Traitor Greene and then Marjorie Traitor Brown, even though he's never quite explained in what way is Marjorie Taylor Greene a traitor. Traitor to whom? Whom has she betrayed? She was nothing if not a loyalist to Trump, but he calls her a traitor. But he has nothing to say about the meeting with Pollard. I remember when he gets the worst betrayal, that was said by Cap Weinberger, who was Reagan's defense secretary during the 1980s. So he knew exactly what secrets Pollard divulged, and he said this is the worst betrayal of American secrets in history. So that and he gets invited to the U.S. embassy. Yeah, and Trump has nothing to say about that. The interesting thing, I mean, just going back to the Elmer Gantry, and I see what I wonder what Cynthia thinks about it, is the film really. I think it's not exactly faithful to the book, because I think in the book, Gantry is a very unsympathetic character. I think he really is a huckster, a con man, um, a really, a really terrible person. Yeah, you know, exploiting people, making a lot of money, and and not really believing any of the stuff he talks. Waging this war against sin when he was among the worst of the sinners. But that's in the book. But in the film, Gantry is not at all portrayed unsympathetically. I think he's kind of seen as almost like a tragic figure. Um, there's no real evidence, at least in the film, that he's being dishonest about it. I think that he really does believe in this, and I think he really, really liked this. The Sharon, the Gene Simmons character. And indeed, the moment when everybody attacked him, he seemed almost like a Jesus Christ character. He made no attempt to defend himself. People were just throwing things at him, and he just stood there, like like Christ. So the film portrayed him in a much more sympathetic light than did the book. So that's sort of interesting that the film received obviously a lot of very positive reviews and won all the Oscars, but it did, I think, distort the message of the book. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. As always, I really appreciate that. And Marty has provided us with a picture of Marco Rubio with a very nice looking rifle. Oh, it looks good. Nice. Where you could rest your shoulder. That's it. So Marco with robust, looks very robust. Yeah, you definitely. And he's got Marco Rubio written on his I think on his sweatshirt. That's nice, just in case no one is quite sure who that is. So yeah, that looks a nice gun. I mean, that looks a very um, a serious thing. So that's Marco, and then yeah, with with Marty with that picture. I can't get over that picture with Ursula von der Leyen. It's like before Marco, no, sorry, Marty, you posted that when she was singing with her father, that was when she was this nice, dutiful daughter, one of seven children. She's one of seven children, and she has seven children of her own. But she was then recording songs with her father. Um, anyway, so and then this is what I was talking about earlier. This, which Marty has posted. This very strange episode. This is some kind of a TV show in Germany, and she gets into this. I don't know what exactly that's called. It's not a box, but it's looks like a bin. To be honest, looks like a bin, a dustbin. And so she gets in with this little boy who seems kind of baffled as to why this grown woman is getting into this bin with him, and then she has to, then she's lifted up by that Australian actor who kind of lifts her up in his arms and takes her out of this bin. And if you watch that video, she seems quite taken by this Australian actor. I forgot his name, because she seemed almost lost for words. Somehow she seemed to get very excited by being lifted and carried by this famous actor. So I mean that's worth looking at. I think Marty, you post. Yeah, here it is. There's it's the link, the YouTube link. It's worth looking at. I mean, it looks. It gives you a very different idea of Ursula. Um, I mean, I think one thing I think we can conclude from this episode, she's a weird person. I mean, that was one weird episode, getting in there with this little boy who seemed really just nonplussed. Just like, what the hell's going on here? And then getting lifted up and carried to the sofa. Uh, so, anyway, thank you so much, Marty. NKMRD says that last picture must be from the show Wetten Das. Okay, maybe yeah, Wetten Das. Quite a cult show with a huge status. Okay, the moderator with the curly blonde hair ended his career with a quite direct attack on the media landscape nowadays. Is that right? That's interesting. What was what was the gravamen of his attack? What did he think about the media landscape? What was did he say why he didn't like it? I mean, I mean, he obviously seems quite. I mean, it seems to be a part of the media landscape. So it's interesting. I'd be interested to find out what it is he said about it. Um, and so that was um, yeah, that was Ursula von der Leyen. Um, very terrible person, but um, and as I say, she's definitely weird. That episode on that show, it was a weird thing to do because she was still kind of a senior political figure. I mean, her dad had been a serious candidate for candidate for chancellor in 1976, but he was pipped at the post by Helmut Kohl, and then she was you know, was a defense minister for Angela Merkel. She was family, health, human services, whatever that was. So, seemingly a serious person and behaving in this weird way. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you very much, everybody who would join me. Thank you so much for all of your comments and um, questions, and above all for the contributions, because these contributions make our work possible. I know the dogs, they say, no, it makes our work possible. They take the credit for it, and that's why they're never happy with the condition of the tip jar. But I really appreciate your generosity. That's why we can do what we do here. So thank you for today, and we will be back on Thursday. So same time, and it'll be Thanksgiving Day, and maybe by then we'll have a better idea of what's in the 19 points. And so, but Thanksgiving, we work even on Thanksgiving. So thank you very much for today. See you Thursday. Until then, all the best. Bye bye.